Well, hi there again. It's Mr. Johnson coming to you here from Westlake High School, classroom 408 here in Johnsonland, ready to attack Act 5 as we are at the end of this play of Hamlet. There are only 2 scenes in Act 5 for this particular video. We will cover one scene and then just a little bit into the second scene to set us up to be able to finish the play on our next and final video. This part begins in Act 5, page 101 in our particular script. And the first thing really you should do is where it says enter 2 clowns, I would scratch out the word clowns and write the word grave diggers. These are comedic figures. This is right after such a tense moment, a sad moment when Ophelia had passed away at the very end of Act 4. And we get this graveyard scene where Ophelia is about to be buried, and these 2 grave diggers are having this kind of comical conversation. And they're put in there intentionally for a little bit of comic relief. And our script calls them clowns, but what they essentially are grave diggers. In fact, if you're into marking things, maybe mark the very first sentence, the first question in page 101. Is she to be buried in Christian burial that willfully seeks her own salvation? Basically, the question they're asking is they're preparing her grave is should she be getting a quote-unquote Christian burial because she took her own life? Of course, we know that Ophelia was in madness. Was it intentional? Was it an accident? Kind of hard to know, but it seems like it could have been suicide. The very top, page 102, maybe mark that statement as well. We have the truth on it. If this had not been a gentlewoman, she would have been buried out of Christian burial. The second gravedigger kind of responds to this question that the only reason really she's getting Christian burial at all is that her father was an important person. Her father worked for the king, so she was a genteel woman. She was a noble class. So that's why she's getting a funeral at all. On page 102, they're just chatting, and the first gravedigger throws a riddle at the second gravedigger, middle of the page. Who builds something stronger, the mason, shipwright, or carpenter? Is that a bricklayer, someone that builds ships, or someone that builds houses? And he won't give a straight answer. Ultimately, he says that none of them do. We build the houses that last forever because we're grave makers, because when these people are buried, they stay buried. As this is happening, at the top page 103, here we get our title character back into the scene where Hamlet, who we already know is on his way back to Denmark. He had sent a letter ahead to Horatio. Horatio has met him at the coast. In fact, Horatio has no idea of what's going on with Ophelia and the fact that she had passed away and whatnot. As they are working their way back from the coast to the castle, they come across these 2 grave diggers. See them digging a grave. They have no idea who they're digging this grave for, which makes it ironic and a little bit tragic. Top page 103, as Hamlet just sees them digging and hears them whistling and having some wine, he's like, custom hath made in him a property of easiness. Man, you dig enough graves, you're not really very feeling about it and whatnot. And here old boy's digging. It's kind of like a mass grave. It's not a very nice cemetery where everybody's kind of got their own plot. This gravedigger's just throwing out skulls and bones and things. Over on page 104, finally, him and Horatio have been talking. Finally, he approaches the gravedigger and has a conversation with him. He asks in the middle of the page, whose grave is this, sirrah? Whose grave is this, sir? And the gravedigger says, it's my grave. And Hamlet says, a comical, funny line, a nice wordplay here. I think it be thine indeed, for thou liest in it. I think it be thine indeed, for thou liest in it. Well, obviously it's a wordplay, because were the gravedigger lying in the grave, it would be his grave. But even though he's standing in it, he is telling a lie, so he's lying in it. So yeah, it is your grave because you're lying in it. Keeps asking him, who's the grave for? He says, not for a man. Is it for a woman then? No, not for a woman either. Well, who's to be buried in it? Well, someone that was a woman, but now she's dead. He just really, as Hamlet is just on the verge of finding out that his girlfriend has passed away, very tragically, in fact, he can't get an answer from this guy, and the man won't even give him an answer even then. Top of page 105, as he is chatting with this first gravedigger, where I would mark, it's about the 6th line down, I would mark a total of 6 lines. Of all the days in the year, I came to it that day that our last king Hamlet overcame King Fortinbras. How long is that since? Cannot you tell that? Every fool could tell that. It was the very day that young Hamlet was born, he that is mad and sent into England. So we get a little time frame here that matters. Hamlet's asking this guy when he started this job. He's been digging graves for a long time. He says, I began this job the day King Hamlet defeated and killed King Fortinbras. And Hamlet's like, how long ago was that? Well, that was the day young Hamlet was born. It's obvious that this guy does not know that he is talking to the prince. It's part of why he's being kind of sarcastic and just messing with him and whatnot. We get some time frame there that in the middle of the page, why in Denmark I've been sexton, man and boy here 30 years. And I think I'd mentioned to you when we began this play, just to get some perspective on it, that Hamlet was a 30-year-old person. He was away at university when the story began, before the story began, actually. But he's 30 years old, and he's very much a grown man and maybe ready to be king. And here's where we get that actually specific information. He was born, it was a big day for King Hamlet and for the family. The day that he had his biggest military victory was also the day that his heir, his son, was born. So as they're digging, the guy's still digging as he's talking. He throws out a skull. He picks up a skull, actually. And he says, here's a skull now. This skull has lain in the earth 3 and 20 years. If you turn over to page 106, we get it revealed to us. A pestilence on him, a mad rogue, poured a flagon of Rhenish on his head once. The same skull, sir, was Yorick's skull. Now, this is important for Hamlet because Yorick is somebody that he knew. In fact, growing up in the royal castle, you know, depending on how much time his parents had to spend with him, someone that Hamlet probably spent a lot of time with was the jester. The jester was very funny. He seemed to have lots of just jokes and songs and things like that. In fact, maybe marked 6.5 lines, starting with "Alas, poor York," as this kind of famous scene. In fact, I think it's pictured on the front of your script here, the gravedigger reaching up, handing the skull to Hamlet. Hamlet takes this skull and he's kind of talking about it, and he's kind of talking to it. "Alas, poor York, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, a most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times, and now how abhorred to my imagination it is, my gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips that I've kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now, your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set a table on a roar?" Thing about Hamlet having a memory of this particular person was, and really for any of us, probably the times that we feel most alive is when we are laughing. Laughter is such a kind of a balm to the pain that we feel in our lives sometimes. It can be something that kind of takes us away from the other things, and you just feel this when you're laughing, maybe the serotonin just really hits in your brain that you're feeling this sense of joy, even if you're not in a particularly joyful place. Nothing really represents life maybe more than laughter when we really feel alive. This guy was very, very skilled at making people laugh, and he probably from Hamlet's childhood probably just represented joy and life and whatnot. So here he's holding this skull, and he's remembering when this person had died. In fact, it was mentioned to us that it was 3 and 20 years ago. So Yorick died. If you do a little math there, Hamlet's 30. This cat died 3 and 20 years ago. So Hamlet was 7 years old when Yorick passed. So maybe here, as he's holding the skull, maybe this was the first time, we don't know, maybe the first time Hamlet as a child had to be confronted with death, had to have someone explain to him what death was, and maybe his parents taught him, heaven, hell, that sort of thing. Certainly, this person that was so full of life is now gone, and Hamlet is actually holding his skull. So the guy keeps digging. Hamlet's kind of philosophizing about how we all end up in the ground at some point. And then finally, top page 107, the funeral procession arrives. And it says, "Enter priests in procession, the corpse of Ophelia, Laertes, mourners following, king, queen, etc." From a distance, Hamlet sees the funeral procession coming. So they decide to just kind of hang back, not let everybody know they're there yet, and see what's going on. And as at the bottom page 107, we see Laertes really angry, frustrated with the priest, because the priest will not give her full funeral ceremony. Won't give her all the rites associated with the death of someone. In fact, the priest says her death was doubtful. I'm giving her as much as I can, but to give her more, profane the service of the dead. And boy, Laertes is mad. He's very, very angry and whatnot. As Hamlet, who's hiding, hears this conversation, he realizes that Ophelia has died. This is not something he knew, and it's not something Horatio could have told him, because Horatio had left to meet him at the coast before that happened. At the top page 108, the third and fourth line, in fact, the stage directions also, "Deprive thee of, hold off the earth a while till I've caught her once more in my arms," and he leaps into the grave. And basically, Laertes, in just this show of intense grief, jumps into the grave to hold his sister one more time. We think of someone being loaded to a grave today, like in a casket where the body isn't like exposed. But in that day, probably just the body, like on what kind of looks like a stretcher on this little thing. The body would be kind of just dropped down into the grave, and certainly this is not a very nice cemetery anyway. It's kind of like the big mass grave. Laertes jumps down in there. Hamlet sees this and feels like Laertes is kind of just overdoing it, maybe even kind of showing him up about how much he loved Ophelia. So Hamlet comes out and announces that he's here, and he's very angry at Laertes, and he actually begins to wrestle with him, in essence, in the grave. Laertes had jumped into the grave, so if they begin to wrestle, it says grapples with him. You can see them kind of wrestling, maybe even bumping up against the body in a very disrespectful way. And it's a very almost comical scene, but it's really not. It's very sad that these two are going at it like that. And then Hamlet makes a proclamation at the bottom of page 108. I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my sum. What will you do for her? Last 2 lines in the page. I'll do it. Come here. Dost thou come here to whine, to outface me with leaping in her grave? Basically, Hamlet feels like Laertes is trying to show him up, and that's why he's making a big show here. And probably part of him feels guilty. He's saying 40,000 of you couldn't love her as much as I did, and we all know from working our way through this story, maybe Hamlet justified in his mind, rationalized that he was doing certain things and saying certain things, but he was very, very cruel to Ophelia, someone that he claims now that he loves so deeply. And he knew everything he said and he did was going to go straight to Polonius, and that Polonius would go straight to the king. So he had a way of just kind of manipulating everyone and causing everyone to be unsteady about him and whatnot. But man, if you really love somebody, could you just treat her the way that he treated her from the very first time that we saw? He walks to her room and stares at her, doesn't speak to her, and then he later tells her he loved her, he didn't love her, and she'd go to a nunnery and all these things. And it was just very, very cruel. And then finally, the ultimate is he took her father's life, and that seems to maybe push him over the edge. So as mad as he is at Laertes, he probably also feels some guilt over how this thing is played out, and the fact that someone that he loved, he actually hurt very, very bad. Finally, as they're done with the funeral and whatnot, Hamlet says he's going to get Laertes. Page 109, let Hercules himself do what he may. The cat will mew and the dog will have his day right before he exits. Basically saying he's going to have his day. We know that there's a plan to try to get these two guys to have a fencing match. Hamlet doesn't know that yet, but he plans to get some revenge. If you look at scene 2, I just want to get a couple of pages into it so we can learn what happened to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Look over on page 110. About the 7th line down, maybe mark 7 lines. Up from my cabin, my sea gown scarfed about me in the dark, groped I find out them, and had my desire figured their packet, and in fine withdrew to mine own room, making so unbold my fears forgetting manners, to unseal their grand commission, where I found Horatio, to go down to the last 2 lines of that speech. No, not stay the grinding of the axe, my head should be cut off. Basically what happened, we know that Hamlet has returned to Denmark on a pirate ship. When the night before the pirate ship attacked, Hamlet sneaked into Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's room, took the letters, went back to his room, opened them up, even though they were private and they were sealed and whatnot. And he read the letters specifically said for Hamlet to be killed. They were delivering Hamlet's death warrant to England. They didn't even know what the letters said. So what he did, it says at the bottom of page 110, I sat me down, devised a new commission or affair. He sits down and rewrites the letters, top page 111, an earnest conjuration from the king. And then you go down to the bottom of that speech, last 2 lines. He should the bearers put to death, no, not shriving time allowed. How was this sealed? Why, even in that heaven ordinate, I had my father's signet in my purse, which was the model of that Danish seal. So basically, Hamlet has this death warrant from King Claudius. He goes back to his room. He sits down and writes letters and makes it look exactly like they are from Claudius. But this time, instead of saying kill Hamlet, it says kill the bearers of these letters. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have continued all the way to England without Hamlet, but they still got letters from Claudius. They delivered the letters to the King of England. When the King of England opens them up, immediately he knows that he's supposed to kill, or he believes he's supposed to kill these 2 people, and he has them executed. It looks very official, because even though Hamlet had opened Claudius' letters, Hamlet had his father's seal, his signet, which is the official royal seal of Denmark. And when he closed the letters up, the little wax seal, he put that on there and made it look very official, to where it was very believable that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were to be executed. So that's where we learn there on page 111 that how Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have died over in England. That, my friends, is far enough. We will pick back up with our last video for the last few pages of this particular act and scene. We'll be finishing this play very, very soon. I hope this has been useful to you. Thanks for staying with this the whole time. Okay, bye.